It's tournament time, and this March, Fanatic Sportsbook has 10 times the rewards. Starting round one, we're giving you 10 profit boosts every single tournament game day. That's over 100 chances to level up your winnings. Plus, you'll earn fan cash on your bets, which you can use on anything at Fanatics. We're talking team gear, tickets, collectibles, and a whole lot more at Fanatic Sportsbook.
Must be 21 plus. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-MY-RESET. CT, call 888-789-7777. MA, call 800-327-5050. NY, call 877-8-HOPE-NY. MD, visit mdgamblinghelp.org. Offer not available in all states. Terms apply. See Fanatic Sportsbook app.
One of the kind of secular articles of faith that the Western world runs on is that there is a unbreakable connection between the freedoms we afford to capitalism and the freedoms that society affords to us. That the ability for capital to do as it wishes, to move money around, to invest, to accrue profits, to own property, all that kind of stuff, is the mirror of the rights that particularly here in the UK, are long kind of Macaulay type historiography tells us that have been accumulating bit by bit by curious happenstance since the Magna Carta and the Barons' Revolt and all that kind of thing. And of course, all of this is not necessarily true, and arguably not true at all. And in many instances, the whims of capital and the desires of populaces for kind of meaningful democracy, by which I mean social and economic democracy, have collided, and normally capital has won. So in this episode of the Explaining History podcast, we're just going to explore that a little bit and look at what a world where capital is accumulating and democracy is under threat looks like now, and may well look like in years to come. In the early years of the Cold War, during a period of profound crisis where the certainties that had existed prior to the Second World War were in decline, the British and French power, particularly in the world, was in terminal decline, and the advance of the communist world was seemingly unstoppable. You have communist victories across Eastern Europe between 1944 and 48, and then in 49 China, and also in 49 the detection of the first Soviet atom bomb test. In this moment of a development of a Cold War establishment and a Cold War politics, the notions of freedom articulated by Winston Churchill at Dayton, Ohio, in 1946, in his Iron Curtain speech, and the language of various groups, often closely associated later on in the 1940s and 50s, with the developing CIA, um, presented a kind of a thesis almost to Western populations that whatever else communism was, it was antithetical to the idea of freedom. And also consider the context. This is in the aftermath of the Second World War, right in this age of kind of totalitarianisms, and you've had a war presented to Western allied populations again as a war for freedom, and in many ways it certainly was. You have the famous Four Freedoms poster by Norman Rockwell, one of the kind of the key propaganda tools used by America during the Second World War. And that those sorts of simple articulations of war aims and what it is that democratic states seek to protect was there are many examples of that sort of propaganda during the war, and much of it is heartfelt. I mean, Roosevelt did believe that democratic states needed to prevail. He believed that Britain in 1940 needed to be supported, and he believed to a greater extent that America was and should be the arsenal democracy. However, it is always important to observe with Roosevelt that he had um, war aims, American war aims, that sought to really eclipse the British Empire, to see the British Empire and European empires in general gradually dismantled after the war, and for a world of nation states that would broadly follow the economic frameworks that America was going to introduce after the war, which would benefit the United States. So it never think of these things as being purely benign acts, because states don't do purely benign acts. But it's whilst we kind of question and examine the relationship between liberal democracy, of which the idea of freedom is but one part, and the designs of the power of capital, and start to kind of separate them out, we must also accept that not every impulse by every historical actor is one based on pure cynicism. To suggest that there was no idealism in the the kind of the prosecution of the Second World War against Nazism is incorrect, I think. However, coming back to our kind of core question about the relationship between capitalism and liberal democracy and how these things are fused together, what we have to do is kind of almost dehistoricize ourselves slightly. So, our notions of the workings of capitalism and the workings of markets, the idea of the ideas and the philosophy around private ownership, during the kind of 1940s and 50s and into the 1960s, these gradually become more widespread and democratized. The idea of there being an economy, well, most people weren't talking about this concept up until the 1950s. The idea of economics, about this sort of system that we all exist in within nation states called an economy. They might have talked about the cost of living or the price of things, but broadly, there being an economy was not a kind of a widespread democratized idea. And one of the ways in which the popular capitalism, i.e., a capitalism which is where kind of a great number of people participate in it and own a stake in it, was a thing perhaps of the across the Western world of the 1960s onwards. When you have people with increasing levels of prosperity, they are capable of investing, owning shares, and that sort of thing being no longer the preserve of the wealthy capital owning classes. Everybody gets to kind of have a bit of it, and it sees its kind of high point in the 1980s, particularly in the UK, with privatisation. Mrs. Thatcher's belief was that privatisation would eventually lead to a new form of very stable participatory capitalism, where former nationalised entities and also British companies that have been particularly lazy, and family-owned British companies have been particularly lazy and were going to be encouraged to be floated on the stock market. A population that controlled shares in this would be kind of almost have the whip hand over the boardroom and make sure that companies were efficient, because they would everyone would demand their dividends, and it would force companies to force Britain's kind of stagnation that had existed from the 70s onwards to come to an end. It's a nice idea, but obviously none of that happened, and instead institutional investors hoovered it all up, and now they own all our utilities, and that's a whole other podcast. So freedom was a concept that served mainly those already who had power to exercise it. So freedom for freedom that was marketed as something that was a right, this notion of liberty, a right for all of us, that had been struggled against, fought for in the Second World War, and generations of those who didn't come home, and veterans that fought and were wounded, were a kind of a potent symbol to Western populations never to stray into the world of totalitarianism ever again. However, it's a convenient stick, not just to beat communism with, but to beat its various kind of the left's various kind of more moderate iterations across the democratic world with. The constant attempt on the political right to conflate even the mildest formations of social democracy with totalitarianism, to present the kind of the New Deal or the in America, or the welfare state in Britain, or social welfare in Europe, as some creeping anti-democratic statist coup, was largely seen. These ideas are largely seen as kind of absurd and marginal until you get to the 1970s. These were ideas which were kind of exaggerated, and the kind of exaggerated nonsense that often pundits on the conservative right come out with. But these were heartfelt ideas by the Hayekian neoliberals who were waiting for the crisis that would come along in the 1970s with two oil shocks, in order to put these ideas into motion. And in the 1970s was a kind of counter-revolutionary moment. There is a great bit in David Edgerton's book, The Rise and Fall of the British Nation, where he talks about how
It's tournament time, and this March, Fanatic Sportsbook has 10 times the rewards. Starting round one, we're giving you 10 profit boosts every single tournament game day. That's over 100 chances to level up your winnings. Plus, you'll earn fan cash on your bets, which you can use on anything at Fanatics. We're talking team gear, tickets, collectibles, and a whole lot more at Fanatic Sportsbook.
Must be 21 plus. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-MY-RESET. CT, call 888-789-7777. MA, call 800-327-5050. NY, call 877-8-HOPE-NY. MD, visit mdgamblinghelp.org. Offer not available in all states. Terms apply. See Fanatic Sportsbook app.
Ever walk past a place for rent and wish you could just take a peek inside? Maybe even explore the layout. Envision the natural light streaming through the windows. Or plan where your vinyl record collection would go. At Apartments.com, you can. With tools like their 3D virtual tours, you can see the exact unit you could be living in. Really envision yourself in your new home with Apartments.com, the place to find a place.
And I paraphrase here, that in the 1970s, a segment of the middle class basically looked at the welfare state and the erosion of what they viewed as moral standards through the kind of various cultural revolutions of the 1960s, and said kind of enough's enough. We are getting rid of this. And they waited until they discovered their vehicle in Margaret Thatcher. And the 1970s and the 1980s are perhaps a moment where capital and the notion of social democracy, their kind of brief Cold War compact, shatters permanently. Partly, I mean, as you go through the 1980s, the decline of the Soviet Union makes social democracy less and less of a necessity. Social democracy, from a left perspective, is what the advanced capitalist societies create when they are faced with the prospect of revolution. And there's plenty of evidence for this. Bismarck's social reforms in the 1880s, were really about stealing the left's thunder. The expansion of the franchise in Britain throughout the 19th century during the three Reform Acts, 1832, 1867, and 1883. And the subsequent social reform that comes as a result of that, when you suddenly have a large working class electorate, or middle class and then a working class electorate, and then obviously the Fourth Reform Act in 1918. You have to do all those things, firstly, again, to stave off revolution, and secondly, once you've got a large electorate, you need to offer them things, otherwise the other party, the Conservatives or the Liberals or one or the other, will offer it to them first. And social reform is accelerated after 1917, when a viable alternative in a workers' state in the Soviet Union emerges. The crisis for labor around the world comes with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And the collapse of the Soviet Union wasn't a thing that began and happened and was concluded in 1989 to 1991. This is arguably, you can trace it back to 1956, but you can do this with historical trends all the time, can't you? 1953 always, perhaps it could never have survived beyond Stalin. Whatever the case, it was a golden opportunity for social democracy, the democratization of social need, to be rolled back. And again, the left critique of this is perhaps that the provision of social democracy was always quite superficial anyway. It was never democratized. People weren't born with rights to housing and healthcare. Instead, these are the offerings given by the bourgeoisie. Whatever the case, we now exist in a place where capital is unfettered, set free, in ways in which it hasn't been in 150 years. It has the ability to, the process of the technologies and the process of globalization money can move around as it wishes. Money has never been more free. It has never enjoyed more freedom. The constant refrain, whenever a moderately left party here in the UK, currently the Green Party, talks about taxing wealth, is that, well, wealth will run away. There have been points in British history, through most of modern British history, most of the 20th century, where wealth couldn't do that. And the currency controls, tax havens after the Second World War, are the product of the inventive attempts to get round currency controls, to evade taxation, for people that own private wealth to be able to say, well, I'm not giving it to the taxman who's simply going to redistribute it to the unworthy. And it was that very class that sought to destroy Britain's social democratic compact, which was not necessarily in the best of health anyway, finally from 1979 onwards. Where we exist now, on the other side of the kind of the neoliberal moment. Neoliberal moment, I believe, I mean, you can argue that this happens at different times and in different ways, but as a rule of thumb, I would argue that it begins in the mid 1970s, probably in Britain around 1976, when the Callaghan government accepted an IMF loan and the structural adjustment that came with that kind of made a lot of Thatcherism almost like a fait accompli. There were various kind of moments of economic neoliberal developments under Carter. Carter was more attuned to Reagan's economics than is popularly thought. But obviously, these things become entrenched in the 1980s, and one can argue that by 2008 is.
It's tournament time, and this March, Fanatic Sportsbook has 10 times the rewards. Starting round one, we're giving you 10 profit boosts every single tournament game day. That's over 100 chances to level up your winnings. Plus, you'll earn fan cash on your bets, which you can use on anything at Fanatics. We're talking team gear, tickets, collectibles, and a whole lot more at Fanatic Sportsbook.
Must be 21 plus. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-MY-RESET. CT, call 888-789-7777. MA, call 800-327-5050. NY, call 877-8-HOPE-NY. MD, visit mdgamblinghelp.org. Offer not available in all states. Terms apply. See Fanatic Sportsbook app.
It is the watershed moment, which I think we still feel the effects of now, where neoliberalism as a concept explodes, and we now exist in some kind of zombified version of it, never to die. And on the far side of neoliberalism, we exist with a capital that is so powerful. It has freed itself almost from all democratic constraints, certainly all social democratic constraints, and it can fully articulate itself. I know the kind of the Quinn-Slobodian argument is that the far right, the far right movements that exist across the world now have their origins in Hayekian neoliberal thought. His book Hayek's Bastards is based on that, and I kind of paraphrase because I'm just working through it at the moment. So that's not a perfect iteration of his thinking. However, that where we are now with the kind of development of what Yanis Varoufakis would call tech feudalism, or kind of oligarchic power, is capital completely liberated from not from the state, because it relies on the state. It relies on state power of coercion. It relies on government contracts. People like Elon Musk would not be as wealthy as they are were it not for large state subsidies. So it's not liberated from the state. It's captured the state, but it's liberated from notions of liberal democracy and social democracy, and looks to looks with kind of an obsessive hatred towards ideas of economic democracy, the sharing of common wealth. And this is nothing short of catastrophic. Where we are in here in this moment in the 21st century is a moment where in the Western world, capitalism and democracy have almost completely diverged. So much so that you have the kind of the titans of capital now, the likes of Elon Musk, the wealthiest man in the world, openly are agitating against democracies around the world, insisting that in European countries, parties like the AfD or the kind of the street thugs of the kind of the far right, various far right movements in Britain, essentially be elevated into power. This is simply because the last vestiges of liberal democracy don't suit people such as he. But for democracies, or even fairly authoritarian democracies that have existed around the world in the post-war era, where popular movements have demanded autonomy to access their own resources and to channel those into the development of society, then you've found liberal democracies, in inverted commas, in the global north were never that liberal, and the economists and think tankers and diplomats and politicians and journalists and opinion formers were always perfectly happy to see violent dictatorships and death squads and disappearances in countries as diverse as Chile and South Vietnam and countless other places besides emerge when it turned out that capital was no longer free to do as it wished, which was to be as rapacious as possible and to extract as much wealth as possible. The moment that comes into question, then there is that we see capital do as it wishes. We see its true qualities. So where we are at the moment, when across the global north, rights are slowly being eroded, and the ability to challenge power is being slowly eroded, and the ability to challenge concentrations of power is being slowly eroded. This is simply an experience that, if you were in large parts of the global south, you'd have found very familiar. And we haven't even reached, hopefully we won't do, we haven't even reached some of the more kind of monstrously violent anti-democratic experiences that countries in South America, Southeast Asia and Africa experienced during the Cold War. What prospects do we have for a revived liberal or social democracy? I don't think they're terrible. I think, in fact, the only silver lining that the experience of Trump at the moment gives any of us is that it is so blatant, so gratuitous, so saying the quiet part out loud, where he says, "Oh yes, we're coming to steal these countries' resources, and we will be rigging elections, probably here at home." It makes the bones about it, really. It gives resistance an opportunity, and in other countries such as Great Britain, that have toadied to Trump and decided that the kind of the easy path is a kind of quiet collaboration. That no longer becomes possible either, because civil society in Great Britain, in Spain, in France, in Germany has woken up, and and the political class as well has woken up to the idea that America can't be a reliable partner any longer, and that no matter how much toadying to Trump you do, it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. So there are prospects. What we always have to avoid, of course, is kind of the continuity opposition. People like the Democrats in America managing to squeeze back into power for a few years, and then do what they normally do, which is to celebrate kind of superficial optics, but keep the economic settlement much as it was, and then set up the next round of extreme fascistic populism, or whatever you want to call it. If we do that, then you might as well leave Trump exactly where he is, or whichever member of the Trump clan steps up next, whoever that will be. Anyway, I'll leave you on those thoughts, and we'll be back to regular service perhaps a bit later on. And take good care, everyone. All the best. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.